The training ground buzzed with tension that morning. Fresh recruits of the elite Delta Force stood tall in the cool air, their crisp uniforms glowing under the sun. Among them, young soldiers whispered, laughed, and exchanged knowing smirks as an old man stepped onto the field. His boots were worn, his uniform faded, and a long scar ran down the side of his weathered face. He moved slowly, leaning slightly on his cane, but his eyes, sharp and unblinking, held a glint that no one could quite read. Some of the men nudged each other, chuckling under their breath. "Look at that tattoo," one whispered, pointing to the faded ink on the old man's forearm. It was an eagle clutching a dagger, surrounded by a circle of stars. "That's ancient," another muttered. "Bet he got that from some biker gang." The old man heard it. He said nothing, just gave them a brief glance and continued walking. His silence made the laughter grow louder. The commanding officer, a tall man with a booming voice, called the squad to order. "Listen up," he barked. "This man here," he said, nodding toward the old veteran, "has seen more combat than most of you will ever dream of." The recruits barely listened. They stood at ease, amused. The old man didn't look like much. Too old, too slow, too fragile. One of them, a cocky sergeant named Miller, stepped forward and smirked. "Sir," he said mockingly, "with all due respect, this is Delta training, not a history class." The old man finally spoke, his voice gravelly but steady. "History," he said, "is what built the ground you're standing on, son." Miller chuckled. "And what did you do, Grandpa? Polish rifles?" The group burst into laughter. Even a few instructors tried to hide their grins, but the old man didn't react. He just looked up toward the American flag waving in the wind. Then slowly, he took off his cap and placed it over his heart. The field went quiet. No one expected that. "You think that tattoo's a joke," he said softly, turning his arm so the ink caught the sunlight. "That eagle isn't decoration. It's a mark given to the first covert teams that went where no map existed, places that didn't exist. We weren't supposed to exist." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the horizon as if seeing something far beyond it. "We were the ghosts before Delta was even a name." Miller frowned, uneasy now. The old man's tone carried weight. "Too real to be just talk." "You mean you were in Delta?" someone asked. The old man smiled faintly. "Before it was called that, back when we didn't have patches or fancy logos, just men who didn't come home." The air grew thick. The laughter died, but still, some of the younger soldiers weren't convinced. "Anybody can say that," one muttered under his breath. The old veteran nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "Anybody can say it, but only a few earned it." Before anyone could reply, a black SUV rolled into the compound. A figure stepped out, a four-star general, the kind that made even the toughest men stand straighter. The commanding officer saluted sharply. "General on deck," he shouted. The men snapped to attention. The general approached the group, his eyes sweeping across the field before landing on the old man. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the general stopped, smiled, and saluted first. "Good to see you again, Colonel," he said. The old man nodded humbly. The recruits' jaws dropped. "Colonel," whispered one of them. "That old guy's a colonel." The general turned toward the men, his voice booming. "You boys are standing in front of Colonel James R. Whittaker, the man who led Operation Silent Viper, the reason most of you even have a Delta patch." Silence blanketed the training ground. Miller's face turned pale. The general continued, "When others failed, this man infiltrated enemy territory for 30 days with no backup. His actions saved an entire task force and changed the way this unit fights today." He then rolled up his sleeve, revealing a matching tattoo, the same eagle clutching a dagger, though darker and newer. The recruits stared in disbelief. "You see this mark?" the general said, his voice now lower but heavier. "It's not ink, it's history, it's brotherhood. Every man who wore it stood ready to die so others could live." The old colonel looked at the young soldiers, his eyes burning with quiet pride. "You'll learn tactics, weapons, and strategy," he said softly. "But none of that means a damn thing without respect. Respect for those who built the path before you. Respect for sacrifice." Miller stepped forward, shame flooding his face. He saluted, voice trembling. "Sir, I'm sorry." The old man nodded. "Apology accepted, son. Just remember, every scar, every tattoo, every wrinkle tells a story. One day you'll have your own. Make it one worth honoring." The general smiled. "That's enough for today," he said, dismissed. As the soldiers dispersed, whispers replaced laughter. They no longer saw an old man. They saw a legend who had carried the weight of their uniform before they were even born. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden light across the training field. Colonel Whittaker stood alone, looking up at the flag again. The general joined him quietly. "You still visit the memorial every year?" the general asked. The old man nodded. "Every year. Some of them never got their ink." The general placed a hand on his shoulder. "Neither time nor rank can measure a man's worth. You taught them that today." The old colonel smiled faintly. "Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with guns, but with understanding." As the last light faded, the wind carried the faint rustle of the flag, echoing the stories of men who fought, bled, and lived for the freedom that still waved above them. And though the tattoo on his arm had faded with time, its meaning burned brighter than ever in the hearts of every soldier who had witnessed that moment. Respect is not something you wear on your sleeve. It's something you earn through sweat, pain, and sacrifice. The old veteran standing before the Delta Force, recruits that morning carried the kind of respect that couldn't be taught in any training program or found in any manual. His face was carved by time and war, his hands rough with the memory of battles fought long before these young men were even born. His boots had walked across deserts, jungles, and mountains that most soldiers only read about. Yet, to the fresh recruits standing in front of him, he was just an old man, outdated, irrelevant, and slow. They didn't see the fire behind his calm eyes, the strength hidden beneath his fragile frame, or the history written in the faded tattoo on his arm. They saw a relic of the past and mocked what they didn't understand. When one of the soldiers laughed at the ink on his forearm, calling it ancient, the old man didn't flinch. He had faced worse than mockery. His silence spoke louder than any threat. But the whispering continued until one of the cockier recruits, full of youth and arrogance, stepped forward and asked him if that tattoo was from a biker gang. The old man met his gaze, a faint smile crossing his weathered face, and simply said, "Son, you wouldn't last 5 minutes with the men who wore this mark." His words hit the air like a stone dropped into still water, small but deep. Some of the recruits laughed again, but a few shifted uncomfortably, unsure. They had no idea that the man standing before them was once a storm that history had quietly buried under medals, silence, and time. The training officer barked at them to show some respect, but before he could say more, the distant hum of engines grew louder. A convoy rolled in, and when the doors of the black SUV opened, a four-star general stepped out. Instantly, the laughter stopped. Every soldier snapped to attention. The general walked across the field, his steps confident, but his eyes fixed straight on the old veteran. When he reached him, he stopped, looked at the old man for a moment that seemed to stretch forever, and then saluted first. The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. "It's an honor, Colonel," the general said firmly, his voice carrying across the field. The old veteran nodded, returning the salute. "Good to see you again, General." The young soldiers looked at each other in shock. "Colonel, General," their minds scrambled to make sense of it. The general turned to face them, his expression sharp. "You boys are standing before Colonel James Whittaker, the man who trained the men who trained your instructors, the man who laid the foundation for the unit you proudly serve in today." The recruits' faces changed from amusement to disbelief. Some stared at the tattoo now glowing faintly in the sun. The ink faded, but the meaning deeper than ever. "That mark," the general said, rolling up his own sleeve to reveal the same tattoo, only newer and darker, wasn't a decoration. It was a symbol of the first covert warriors, the ghosts who paved the way for every mission Delta Force has ever undertaken. He paused, letting his words sink in. Colonel Whittaker didn't just serve. He led men into the kind of hell you can't even imagine. He carried soldiers out of burning villages, went weeks behind enemy lines without food, and completed missions so classified the reports are still locked away. The young soldier who had mocked him, Miller, felt his face burn with shame. His earlier words echoed in his mind, now sounding hollow and foolish. The old veteran turned toward him, his expression calm but his eyes piercing. "You thought this tattoo was just ink," he said quietly, "but every line, every scar around it, is written in the blood of brothers who never came home. We wore it not to show off, but to remember." Miller swallowed hard, unable to speak. He straightened up, saluted and said softly, "Sir, I was out of line." The old man nodded, accepting his apology with grace. "Son, don't be ashamed of what you didn't know," he said. "Be proud of what you're about to learn, because being a warrior isn't about strength or rank, it's about heart. About standing up when no one else will. About carrying the weight of your brothers and the flag on your shoulders, no matter how heavy it gets." The general placed a firm hand on the old man's shoulder. "You always had a way with words, Colonel," he said with a smile, "and you always knew when to teach a lesson without raising your voice." The old man chuckled softly, the sound carrying a mixture of sadness and pride. "They remind me of us," he said, looking at the young men still frozen in silence, full of energy, full of dreams. "They just need to learn that being tough isn't about shouting louder. It's about standing quieter when the moment demands it." The general nodded. "You taught me that once," he replied, "and I never forgot it." The recruits, still trying to process what they had just witnessed, looked at the tattoo again. No longer a relic of the past, but a sacred emblem of honor and courage. The old man looked up at the flag fluttering in the wind and whispered, "The men who wore this mark may fade with time, but what we stood for never will." As the general ordered the men to dismiss, not a single one moved without saluting the colonel first. The same recruits who had laughed minutes ago now stood straighter, their faces marked with newfound respect. Miller lingered for a moment, stepping closer. "Sir," he said quietly, "did it hurt, getting that tattoo?" The old veteran smiled. "Not as much as earning it." With that, he picked up his cane, adjusted his cap, and began to walk away. The soldiers watched in silence as the man who had carried decades of honor and pain in his heart disappeared into the golden horizon. The general turned toward them one last time. "Remember what you saw today," he said. "You witnessed more than a man, you witnessed a legacy. One day you'll have to carry it forward. Make sure you're worthy of it." And as the flag rippled above them, the young Delta Force recruits stood taller, the laughter of the morning replaced with quiet pride. They now understood that greatness doesn't shout, it stands quietly in the shadow of history, wearing a faded tattoo that time can never erase.